You're listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we're featuring the Leader's Guide to Performance Management seminar that was presented at Children's Institute 2024 in New Orleans.
Excellent. So my name is Elnian Gelbert. I am a trainer at ZingTrain, part of Zingerman's community of businesses, which I'll talk about in just a second. How many of you have attended a session I have led previously at the Winter Institute? Okay, great. Hi. I was going to say, I feel like I see some familiar faces. Good to meet all of you. Okay, I'm learning where the dead spots are. I'm going to stand here for a minute. So I'm from a business that is called Zingerman's. We're a community of businesses that started as a delicatessen in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We've now been in business for over 40 years. ZingTrain is one of the businesses that teaches our business practices that are really firmly rooted in retail, right? That is the industry that we're in. And I firmly believe that what we're going to share with you will apply to your stores as well. Okay, great. Okay, excellent. Thank you. I'm also a former bookseller. So yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm a reader, so I love bookstores. I read a lot. If anyone wants to talk books, my genres are primarily mystery, romance, and some sci-fi fantasy with crossovers to all the other content areas. Okay, so just let's talk books after. I love talking books. So I'm really glad to be here. I've worked at the Zingerman's organization for 17 and a half years. So I have a pretty deep understanding of the policies and procedures and content that I'm going to share with you. I highly encourage questions as we go along. I will have kind of a formal opportunity for you to ask questions a little bit later, but as ideas come to you, I'll do my best to answer them in the moment, and I may defer them to a little bit later as well. So just a heads up on that. I want to ask, who here loves giving feedback to other people? Okay, small subset. Who here really likes getting feedback on how they're doing? Okay, interesting. I bet that if you asked your staff, you'd probably have a similar percentage breakdown, right? Or the people that you work with. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk a lot about today is about giving feedback. It's really hard to manage performance without it, and it's really hard to hold people accountable or solve performance problems if we haven't been giving people chances along the way to change their behavior, right? If we don't start with clear expectations, we don't start with feedback. So we're going to spend a good chunk of time on feedback itself. I also want to mention too that this is going to be interactive, and you're going to have a chance to talk to each other and think about what do you want to take back and apply in your own stores as we go through. So that's how we're going to spend our time. Here is what I hope that you're going to get out of our time together. You'll be able to address performance problems and deliver productive feedback, right? And remember, it's all in the interest of helping the employees succeed, right? That's what all of this is actually about. You'll also be able to use new tools and techniques to supplement and reinforce your performance management skills. We're not starting at ground zero. The intention is you're going to build in what you're already doing well, what you have strong systems for, and then you're going to keep evolving and getting better. Okay. So this is also, you'll see, you have a workbook in front of you. This is on page 2 at the top. You also may notice that there's a candy bar in front of you that is from Zingerman's. I highly encourage you to eat it whenever you're ready. Don't worry about crinkling. It's going to be fine. We're all going to be really forgiving of each other if we crinkle wrappers. And the last point I wanted to make, the last objective, is to call upon a network of peers to help get past roadblocks. And I mean this in a couple of different regards. In one regard, it can be really frustrating to feel like you're doing all the things right, and you're just working really hard and you're trying to be respectful and give good performance feedback and hold people accountable, and then to feel like you're up against a brick wall. The people in this room, right, the people that are part of the ABA are your network of peers, and it can be really helpful to call upon each other and say, hey, remember that training we did in June, like, I feel like I'm doing this, but can we, it's not working the way I thought it was. Can we talk about it, right? So truly calling upon each other as a network of peers. On a more practical level, is anyone here a note taker? I'm a note taker. Can you all read your own handwriting 100% of the time? That's not me. So it's really helpful, like if you're feeling like I wrote down really good notes and it was meaningful in the moment, and now I don't understand what it means, or I can't read my handwriting. Again, reach out to each other. You can also reach out to me. I am a part of your network of peers to help get past those roadblocks, okay? I also want to set the stage by sharing a training tool. This is one of our favorite things to talk about. So the training compact really makes it explicit that there are two important roles in any training. Right? Typically, if training doesn't go well, who gets the blame or holds the responsibility, the trainer or the trainee? Yeah, but there's only one of me and a lot more of you, and I don't really like those odds. So let's make it really explicit that we both have an important role to play in how training goes. So for my side, the trainer side, I've done my best to document clear performance expectations, right? Those were the objectives at the top of the page. By the end of this time, here's what I hope you'll know and be able to do. Then I provided training resources. So what are some of the training resources that have been provided? Just shout them out. Yes, the workbook. Candy, yes. Food is always a really important training resource, right? Caffeine can be an under-recognized training resource. If you need it, there's a Starbucks right downstairs. Okay, what else? The slides, Yeah, me as a trainer, sure. I would say each other, right? You have a lot of knowledge and experience, not only in your current role as a leader, but also yourself as an employee, right? Especially around feedback and performance management, we tend to act in opposition to what we haven't liked in the past, right? Which is fine, but if that's not a concentrated strategy, it can kind of get you into some trouble, right? So each other are really fabulous training resources. And then recognizing and rewarding performance, I'll do that primarily through verbal praise and recognition. There may be some high fives later, but only if you're wearing a green lanyard. I am also wearing a green lanyard. I took it off right now, okay? That's pretty straightforward though. Isn't that what you expect from trainers? Where this is really different is that I also have expectations of you, which is to take responsibility for the effectiveness of your own training. I only know what I personally need to do to take responsibility for the effectiveness of my own training, right? I already mentioned I take notes. I do not retain information unless I write things down. So what are some of the other things that you personally will do to take responsibility for the effectiveness of your training this afternoon? Take notes, also listen, great. Ask questions, that's wonderful. I love questions. Yeah, think about how you're going to take the information back and either implement it or teach it to the other people that you work with. On a practical level, this is a chilly room. I was in the session this morning. So if you find yourself getting really cold, I encourage you to stand up and pace on the side, right? Or do some jumping jacks, or you can do some yoga. I've got tons of room up here. Whatever you need to do to stay alert and engaged, right? I also think taking care of yourself physically, what often happens right after we have lunch. Yeah, we get sleepy. How effective is your learning when you're dozing? Yeah, it's not. I mean, I've tried the osmosis, sleeping on top of a textbook, and it did not work well for me. So I just encourage you to do whatever you personally need to do to stay alert, awake, engaged, and present here. The last thing I want to say about, well, there's two last things I want to say about this. One last thing is if you had to assign percentages on either side of the training compact, who would you give which percentage of responsibility? 50-50, that's very equitable. How well, what else? 80-20, who gets 80? Oh, okay. Okay, we get 20. Okay, you get 80. All right, I like that. Yeah, often people are like 60-30, but you have 70. And I was like, okay, well, those numbers don't match up anyway, right? This is a little bit of a trick question. We used to think it was 50-50, right? It was an equal. That felt very good. But we realized that responsibility goes up in increments of 100%. I needed to be 100% ready to go, willing to live my side full-heartedly, and I'm going to ask you to live your side 100% as well. If we don't, this becomes like the person who is supposed to clean the break room. Like, who cleans the break room? Everybody. Who actually cleans the break room? No one. Or like the one person who can't take it any longer and then writes notes like, your mom doesn't work here, right? No, we want everyone to take 100% responsibility for taking ownership of that. The last thing I was going to say, this is a really fabulous training tool. You are welcome to take it and use it in your stores. It really helps trainees, employees, understand that they are responsible for getting the information that they need in order to be able to do their jobs. One of my least favorite things to ever hear from anyone is like, well, I didn't know, you didn't tell me. Like, well, did you ask? Because you have a role to play here too. So highly encourage, just take off Zingerman's, put in the name of your bookstore, right? It's one of my favorite tools. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to really start getting into the content here. And I want to say that giving effective feedback is an important part of being a leader. And it's something that many people don't get trained on, right? Was anyone given really good training on how to be a leader, how to give performance feedback, how to hold people accountable? 20 years ago, right? Some people are like, well, I went to that one session that one time, right? It isn't necessarily effective. So what we want to do as we start getting into this is really define what are we talking about when we say effective feedback, right? Because again, like with everything, we want to start with that definition. So the first part there, we want it to be balanced, both positive and constructive. People think they only want to get positive feedback. That's not true, though. If you only hear one or the other, it's only constructive or critical, or it's only positive, you stop listening. What people really want, what effective feedback is it's both, okay? It also needs to be timely. I had a coworker who started, her first job was in retail. Her manager gave her feedback after about 6 months that she'd been doing something wrong, because that was when the scheduled review was 6 months. She's like, if you had just told me, I could have done things differently like the past 5 months, right? But they were withholding it for the formal review process. But the feedback needs to be connected enough to the work that the feedback has impact, right? Otherwise, it's not meaningful. It also is really helpful when it's specific and detailed. So using examples, right? When you were on the phone with that customer, I could hear the smile in your voice. You did a great job, right? When you gave directions to the store, that was really great, like asking them if they were opening Google Maps, but then also letting them know about construction in the neighborhood. The more specific we can be, the more likely it is that someone's going to do the thing, keep doing the things that we give them positive feedback on. And especially when you're giving constructive feedback, giving them kind of the alternative. It's not just stop doing that, it's I have found this to be more effective, right? So giving them an alternative as they're moving forward. We also, and I'm already alluding to this, we want feedback to be future focused. So it's not what they did right or wrong. What do you want them to keep doing into the future? And what are 1 or 2 areas of improvement for them to work on going forward? If we give them too much constructive information in any one kind of feedback session, they can't remember all of it. So being specific with a couple of things that you want them to work on in the future, they're just more likely to actually do it. Okay, and these all kind of go together, right? And we want it to be actionable and solutions oriented. So just like be nicer is not actionable, right? Because the employees are like, am I doing it now? Like people don't know, that's not specific enough. So we want to give them really concrete behavioral things to focus on, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. We also think that effective feedback is relationship enhancing. It builds trust, right? It builds the relationship, it provides clarity, and it's also relationship enhancing. We want this to be a dynamic relationship. Ideally, our employees are giving us feedback back sometimes. Not all the time, not in the same way. But if there isn't that kind of bedrock of trust, then they're not as likely to tell us when things aren't working the way that we think they're working. The providing clarity, just no mysteries. If someone isn't performing to your expectations, don't hold it back. I worked with a client not that long ago that had just fired someone. And I was like, well, and they were really frustrated with the whole situation. I'm like, well, how was their performance review? And they're like, like, did you give them any performance feedback? They're like, no, they just weren't doing what they were supposed to do. I was like, well, they didn't ever have a chance to change their behavior. So now you lost all the time and kind of money you spent hiring that person and training them, and you have to start all over again from scratch. I mean, it kind of burned the well, so I don't blame that person for leaving, but this could have been different. This could have gone differently. And then the last bullet point is that it motivates behavioral change or sustained behavior. Otherwise, there isn't a point to doing this. So this is something I'm going to share with you next that I really love talking about, right? We're going to talk about attitude versus behavior. If I were to tell any one of you that you have a bad attitude, what would you say back to me? Oh, yeah? What else? Why? Anyone else want to like really channel their inner 15-year-old and be like, no, I don't? Right? Telling someone they have a bad attitude, you can't really tell what's going on under the surface. So when we talk about what do we mean when we say attitude, it's our assessment based on what we're seeing them do, right? It's based on actions. It's observed behavior. So when I say bad attitude, I'm observing behaviors that lead up to me thinking that they have a bad attitude. I'm assuming motivation. I'm guessing what's actually going on in their head. And not all attitudes are bad, right? Enthusiastic is a great attitude. We like it when people are enthusiastic. But enthusiastic is not a behavior. One of the reasons this is so important is that you cannot coach to attitude. You cannot hold people responsible to attitude. That's internal. That's about their person. What we can coach to, what we can hold people accountable for is their behavior, right? So the behavior is really the actions. What are they doing? What do you see demonstrated? So if we're talking about the definition here, and we're talking about bad attitude, or here's some examples of tone of voice, right? The pace. Those are all different things that let me know that may add up to an attitude. So to go back to the bad attitude example, what are things that would tell you that someone has a bad attitude, right? It's slouching in a team meeting or sitting there with their arms crossed. It's not like actively going to help a customer with a smile on their face, right? It's calling off a lot, showing up late, trying to leave early, not helping out their coworkers, right? There are all of these different, very explicit behaviors that we can see that add up to that assessment that we've made, that judgment that person has a bad attitude. So why this matters is that we want to give feedback about what they're doing, not about their person. And any attitude kind of feedback that we want to give is based on the person. It's not based on the behaviors. And this can be really hard because as humans, we're very good at seeing patterns of behavior that tell us that someone has an attitude. But in terms of performance management, in terms of feedback, it's not productive. So at the bottom of the page there, or in the middle of the page, you see that there is a list of different attitudes and different behaviors. So I'm going to call them out, and I want you to tell me what you think it is. Eye rolling. Oh, yeah, that's a behavior. Right? It was really hard not to use it as an example for bad attitude, but I didn't want to give it away. What about helpful? Helpful is an attitude. Yep. Critical. Yep. Smiling. Team player. Okay. It is an attitude, but behavior is very, very common here. We were working with an art tile producer in Ann Arbor, and they got like the managers, especially the younger managers, were like ready to go to the mat on like team player being a behavior. I was like, okay, then show me team player right now. And they're like, yeah, so it might be an attitude, right? Yeah, because we can think of what makes someone a team player, but team player what is that action? We don't really know what that's supposed to look like. Interrupting. Yeah, you want to talk about a bad attitude. Eye contact. Respectful. Yep. Unmotivated. Loud, audible sighs. Yeah, it's behavior. Yeah. Right? So it starts to get more clear, right, as you practice this a little bit. But what I want to give you a chance to do next, and I'm going to ask you to kind of self-arrange into small groups of 2 to 3 people, which is to start with one attitude. It can be from the list, or you can choose something else, and start identifying the behaviors that tell you that that attitude is what's going on, or that you think that the attitude is what's going on. So what are the behaviors that you see, right? As I did with that example of the bad attitude, what do I see going on that tells me that this might be happening? Because then I can coach to those behaviors, I can hold people accountable for their behavior, and we'll ideally see a change in the attitude over time, okay? What questions do you have about this exercise? Could shy be an attitude? Or reserved might be. I think that there is also a difference between the behavior that is instinctive to someone and their attitude. I don't think that shy would be attitude. I think I don't know. That feels like a squishy zone. When we're thinking about retail, people don't need to be outgoing to be in retail. They need to meet performance expectations, right? So thinking about what do I want to see someone doing in every interaction with a customer, regardless of your personality, whether you're neurodivergent, whether you're neurotypical, this is what this is, right? What is the behavior that I want to see, right? So for an example, we have a performance expectation, which is to follow what we call the 10-4 rule, which is that you make eye contact at 10 feet, you verbally greet someone at 4 feet. Eye contact and smile. Did I say smile? I didn't. Eye contact and smile. It doesn't mean you have to sustain the eye contact, right? So like starting to greet a customer, we can make eye contact and smile, and then I can continue to help you and I can stop smiling and I don't have to keep making eye contact, right? So thinking about that in terms of if that is an attitude, break it down into what do I expect anyone to be able to do in this role, okay? So I'm going to give you about 6 minutes to talk with each other. You can self-organize into groups of 2 or 3, and then I'd like to hear from maybe a couple of folks when we come back together. All right, it's been about 6 minutes. Yeah, get it, ZingTrain. See what we did there? Subtle is not our middle name. All right, my friend, tell me your name. Robert has the mic here. So I'd like to hear from maybe 1 or 2 groups sharing what is the attitude that you discussed, and then what is some of the behavior that you identified that would tell you that the employee has that attitude. Great.
It's okay.
We call that being voluntold.
It's okay, I'll take it. We talked a lot about sensitive. Okay, so we all have this employee. Their attitude is they're very, very, very sensitive or overly sensitive. I don't know what the correct term is. And the behavior, yeah, maybe not overly. Just no judgment. But the behavior would be something like being late or forgetting their shift or like kind of forgetting to do things, and then our inability to say or to, how did we say it?
They're resistant to, it's hard to even approach feedback because it becomes this cycle of like, they feel terrible, like they're letting us down. But of course,
Yes. So the sensitivity comes into it really is what the problem is their reaction to feedback, right? And so that is really hard. So the sensitivity is the attitude, right? Or reactive also sounds defensive, right? Yeah. So being able to identify the behavior and give the feedback on that, not being late, right? That's something that I think will be really important is that, I have some feedback to give you. Is now a good time? And then they say no. And then you say, okay, when is? Because you're going to hear this feedback anyway. And then saying, we have found it to be really difficult, or I have found it, using I statements, to give you feedback that we give to everyone. And, we still have the same performance expectations. So like easing them into understanding this is not about their person, but it's about the behavior. Like we all need to be able to give and receive feedback in this workplace. This is not optional for that person specifically.
Because I had an employee so it was several employees, and I said, like, okay, we're going to talk about this. She's like, I'm not having this conversation.
Oh, it says I'm not having this conversation. I want to ask first too, does anyone in this group who has this happen with their employees? Okay, does anyone feel like they're pretty good at handling it? Oh, no, okay. Oh, you are, okay, great. Well, then I'm gonna pass the mic to you if you would tell us what you do.
Basically, every time I talk to my employee that can be a little bit on the more sensitive side, it's, okay, we're going to talk about feedback. Just know that this is not, really personal to you. This is, I want to make sure that you're comfortable here and that everybody's working well as a team, and just kind of build that up first before diving into any of it, of just really kind of setting this is a safe space. I want to make sure that you know that I'm here for you throughout this conversation and after.
Yeah, I'm going to do a session tomorrow that talks about training, right? And so like a lot of this comes back to clear expectations, right? If the expectation is that you're going to receive feedback a lot, especially in your first months, people know to expect it. I'm also going to share a feedback tool that we use that can be really helpful with this, because then it doesn't feel like you're just giving them feedback and they don't have a say in it. It's a really different way of giving and receiving feedback. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right. Well, thank you very much. I hope was this a productive exercise? Yeah. So speaking of performance expectations, this is not only helpful for feedback. Thinking about these behaviors can be really useful for writing job descriptions and writing performance expectations in the first place, keeping that behaviorally based versus attitude. And I say this as someone who our own organization continues to have, exudes contagious enthusiasm in our job postings. That's really nebulous. But we keep doing it because we want people who can be visibly enthusiastic, but it doesn't rule anyone out. It just kind of attracts people. And probably we should stop using it. All right, let's start talking about informal feedback. So I'm going to say we're going to spend more time here, right, and on formal feedback, and then get into solving performance problems. Because again, if we do this well, this sets up performance feedback to be more successful, and it normalizes giving and receiving feedback, right? That is one of the things that I think people struggle. Oh, uh-oh. Can you restart that? Thank you. I pushed a wrong button. So normalizing this, right, that people are going to get a lot of feedback helps lower the stress level of people when they are actually going to receive feedback. So ideally, it's verbally and in 5 minutes or less. It does not have to be like a formal sit down. It's like we're closing out the register tonight, and I want to just check in with you about how your shift went, right? Or maybe I want to praise you for doing some of the things that you did well, and I want to give you a little bit of constructive feedback about the way that I want things to work tomorrow. It can be a part of the other work. So it's also delivered frequently and immediately. If it is a safety issue, it's immediate feedback, right? If they gave wrong information to a customer, immediate feedback, right? If it was a mistake to the register that they made yesterday, it's not immediate, but I don't want them to continue to make that mistake if they're counting that down incorrectly. So there's a discretion on what gets delivered immediately or what gets delivered a little bit less frequently. But the thing is that it's a habit and that they're used to hearing it. So it's also specific and focuses on behaviors, right? I'm going to keep stressing behavioral performance expectations a lot. So what did you see? And when we're giving them performance feedback on behaviors, it's not everything you saw, the laundry list of things. If this is only taking 5 minutes, I maybe have time for 2 or 3 things. The employee is also not going to remember things if I give them like a whole list of all the things I want them to think about doing differently the next day. What are a couple of things that I want them to focus on tomorrow? And this is really where we start building that relationship. It shows them what they're like. It shows them you know what they're doing. You're paying attention. So we're praising the things that they're doing well and giving explicit examples about it. What I think often happens in a lot of busy retail environments is that we see good things happening, we make a mental note of it, and then we're on to the next thing or someone interrupts us. So I think it's kind of the positive version. If you see something, say something. Right? I try to think about this with compliments to people. I think things all the time that I'm like, oh my gosh, I really like her dress. Oh, those pants are great. Right? I'm trying to like just say those things more, not about the person, but about a choice that they made. Right? My dad wanted to tell a woman she had really pretty eyes, and I was like, no. I'm so sorry, Dad. No, you may not. She's like, but her eyes are so pretty. I'm like, okay. Just think it real hard in your head. Maybe she'll feel it. And then the other tool that there is it talks about the like best next time feedback tool. This is the one that I told you. This is something that we use instead of the commonly used and hated compliment sandwich. Is anyone familiar with that? Right? So you give someone like a compliment, something constructive, and then a compliment. We worked with a client that was like, oh yeah, we don't do that here. We do the gluten-free version. I was like, so just critical feedback. That sounds fun. How's your retention going for your employees? It was so terrible. So what this is, you may have seen this before if you attended one of the sessions I did at Windsor Institute in 2023, but we love this and we teach this all the time. This is future-focused positive feedback, right? So I will say this is typically used the most in training when someone is learning a new task or a new skill, or we might do it in kind of the early days at the end of a shift. So how did this shift go? And step 0.5 that I'm not going to share here, it's kind of a double top secret first step, which is that the employee needs to know that it's going to happen. Right? So if I'm teaching someone how to answer the phone, right, use the script and have a good phone conversation, I would let them know at the end of this call, we're going to do some like best next time, right? Because then they're paying attention to it differently. I don't have the best recall. So if someone is like, okay, we're going to do like best next time on that phone call you just had, I'm like, did I talk to someone on the phone? Are you sure? I don't remember anything about how that went now, okay? So then the first step is, I would ask the trainee, what did you like best about how that call went? What did you do well? And so the trainee will start to identify the things that they did well and ideally will keep doing into the future. So they'll say things like, well, I smiled when I answered the phone and I gave them, some information and then I put them on hold and asked for help. Rather than just try to guess what the information was, right? So then I, as the manager or trainer, can say, yes, I agree, you did a really good job. I wasn't even looking at you, but I could hear the smile in your voice. I know that carries through. You were really friendly, right? I will say it was really great that you got more information, that you put them on hold. I might have some more feedback on that in the next time, but here it is just positive, and ideally I am adding to what they already identified, right? The next step is, okay, so if you were to have exactly that same call again, what would you do differently next time? So then the trainee might be like, well, I didn't give them my name when I answered the phone, and that's part of the script, right? And I didn't thank them at the end of the call. It's like, okay, so then ideally I'm saying like, yeah, I noticed you didn't give them your name. That is part of our script. So use your name. And then thanking them is really nice. And when you put them on hold, you just said hold please and put them on hold. And for us, that's a question. So I need you to ask the customer, may I please put you on hold, and then wait for their answer. Right? So next time, that's what I would really like you to focus on, is if you're putting someone on hold, ask them the question, wait for their answer, and then take action. Okay? So what strikes you about this feedback method? It's collaborative. What else? It's a conversation, right? This isn't scary to the trainee in the same way that I'm going to tell you about that phone call that you just had. I have some feedback about that phone call. Feels really different. The other thing too about it, because the trainee starts, I'm able to build on what they're telling me. They're identifying it for themselves, and it means that they're understanding the actions that they're taking. They understand when they're meeting or not meeting the expectations. The other thing that's really great about this is that this is not what they did right or what they did wrong. It is what did we like best, and what do we want them to work on going forward. Okay, do I see a question? It focuses on the behavior. Yeah, they talk about their behaviors without feeling ashamed of making mistakes, right? So, and I'm not going to beat them up. I'm not going to be like, well, you did nothing well, and here's the laundry list of things you need to do differently next time. That does happen, though, sometimes, right? Like, we get to the end of the conversation, I ask them, like, what did you like best? Everything. I nailed it. I'm like, disagree. Like, what would you do differently next time? Like, nothing. It was so good. I'm like, hard pass. In that instance, I'm not going to stick with this 4-part, right? When I realize that we are so mismatched on how their performance was, we're gonna reframe that and have a different conversation. Like, wow, I'm so sorry. I don't think I was clear about what I was asking you to do. Like, let's go back over the expectations, right? Because there was some big mismatch in our expectations. One of the other things that often happens with like best next time is I ask the trainee, what did you like best about how you did that? They're like, well, I should have done this. I should have done. I'm like, okay, hold on. We're going to get to the next times in just a minute. Let's start with what you did well. I saw a lot of things that went really well, right? So I'm steering the ship of this conversation. We use like best next time a lot, right? So we use it so much. We use it at the end of shifts. We use it to debrief events. So it's not the 4-part method when we do it that way, but this is such a part of our language that we will say, what did we like best about how this event went? Like, we collectively, what do we want to do differently the next time? And we'll do a big listing on a flip chart. And I will tell you that there's almost always some of the things on both sides. What did we like best? Really great number of attendees. What did we want to do differently next time? We couldn't really handle that number of attendees, right? And so then it's kind of the like, yeah, that did feel really good to know that so many people wanted to come to this event. We're going to need to think about our systems for next time. Do we need a larger venue? Do we need to hire more people? Do we need to, does it need to be ticketed, right? So it kind of it's different information. And when we do that and document it close to the time of the event, the next time we're going to do a similar event, we can pull that out and be like, okay, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's look at what we did well and what we want to keep doing and what are the opportunities that we have to continue to improve, okay? The other thing about this too is that this does not have to be manager to employee. This can be peers. We do this regularly and routinely with each other. This tool just gets used a lot at Zingerman's, right? Which makes it less scary for people. All right, I would like to keep talking about this and have you do a role play, but we have other things to talk about. Oh, question. Come to you.
Thank you, Robert. We might get to this later, but what do you do when you have an employee who does think they're doing everything correct, maybe, and you're trying to give feedback and they're not receiving it because they're very confident?
Yeah, that is a tough one. I mean, we kind of call that willful incompetence, right? That they're just not, like, they're not doing the job well and they won't hear any feedback about it. I think it can be like, I don't know that I was really explicit about the definition of what I'm asking you to do, right? Let's go back to the performance expectation. Let's go back to the SOP, right? Because if they feel like they're doing a good job and I don't agree, I mean, I'm the arbiter here. So there are definitely things I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Can you make them more objective and less subjective? Right? Especially around customer service where people will have things like be friendly, that's really subjective. So what exactly am I looking for from this person? Yeah. Yes, question. He's bringing the mic to you.
Hi. What if you don't necessarily have an SOP at all or a training
That's a great chance to start writing them. I mean, honestly, ask the employees, so the employee's not doing it. And again, I mean, I'm going to do another session this afternoon or tomorrow, so that talks more explicitly about that. But the systems, it's helpful when the systems exist. If they don't exist, the next best time to having written it 10 years ago is now. Right? And then you can ask, you can vet it, you can have other managers look at it, right? Until we're in agreement, this is what I expect you to do. Yeah. Yeah, it's not fun work, but it's really productive. Okay. All right, let's get into formal feedback here, right? So this is, we're talking more about performance reviews. So we do them in a more scheduled setting, and it's in writing, so the employee can have it and refer back to it. It's in their employee file. So typically we do this at 90 days, which is the end of our orientation period, at 6 months in someone's first year, and then annually going forward. And employees can ask for one sooner if they want it. I don't know of anyone who ever has. Yes.
I'm curious as we're going through this, if you could note anything that might be different about shift employees or part-time employees versus full-time employees.
All of this is all of it. Yeah. Yep. It's for our part-time employees, it's for our full-time employees. Less so for seasonal employees, people who are only going to be with us for 2 or 3 months, right? But they still need feedback. It's just on a much more accelerated schedule. So this is true of part-time and full-time staff. So if our review is done well in writing, there are no surprises. I will say this more than once. No surprises. I will say it again later. It's also given to the staff member 24 hours in advance, so they have a chance to read it and react to what they're going to see there, right? So ideally, the way that we structure our reviews, there is the things that are going well, there are areas of improvement, and what are specific goals that we have for the employee in the year ahead. So that might be professional development. It might be like positioning them to be a supervisor into the future, right? We want to have like, what are the things that you want to work on that I want to support you working on, right? So that's a part of the review process for us. Yes.
So are you, with this, are you talking about like you create that formal feedback and share with the employee, or they're also giving their input?
Yes. So we do ask our employees, not every one of the Zingerman's businesses, but to write a self-review. Right? So we ask them what is going well, what are some areas of improvement, right? What do you want to work on in the next year? Is there anything that you'd like to accomplish? So it's essentially that same format. Ideally, we align with what they're doing well in the areas of improvement, but that's a part of that performance conversation. And again, it's balanced feedback, so it's both constructive and positive. Okay, hold on, Robert, there's another question there.
Sorry, brand new bookstore owner here. So do you do the self-review before or after?
Oh, before. Because I want to know that as I'm writing the review. So it's typically due about a week before the review. Then I have time to see it. I get a chance to react to it, not in front of the employee. Because you can imagine if they come to the meeting and then they share it with me for the first time and I'm like, oh, cool. You think you want to be a manager next year? Cool. It's not going to happen. Because what we want it to be, too, is that it's balanced, right? That recognize improvements that they've made in the past. I want to recognize their growth over the course of the year. And I want to motivate improvement and part of that is the recognition of the work that they've done in the past year, right? This goes best, I think, when we've been making notes across over the course of the year. Right? If you get to review process, my retention is not that good. So when I write my self-review, I pull out my calendar, right? And I'm like, what have I done in the past year, right? I need to review and think about the different work that I've done. What am I proud of having accomplished? Again, no surprises. I can't stress that enough. The person feels listened to and valued, right? Because ideally, I've managed to incorporate some of what they told me in their self-review in it. They sign it, and sometimes employees refuse to sign it, Has anyone ever had that happen? Yeah, so what we tell them is like, okay, like it's still gonna be in your file, and these are still the improvements that I need you to make and the goals that I want you to work on next year. Just because they refuse to sign it doesn't mean that that's not still true for them, right? And then it follows the 5 steps for giving effective performance reviews, which is on the bottom of the page, right? And we'll talk about that next. I have personally negotiated in a review as an employee. I got feedback on something and I basically was like, no, I think this is inaccurate. And my review was updated and then I signed it, right? I gave my chance, I kind of rebutted something that was in there because I think it was based on historical information. So my review was actually changed and I signed the updated version, right? But that required a lot of trust between me and my manager to be able to say that to her. I mean, we've also worked together for a really long time. She was my peer long before she was my manager. Okay, so the 5 steps for effective performance reviews. What I'm gonna talk about here is only step 1. This is our structure for doing it because the other steps 2 through 5 require you actually being in the review, okay? So step 1 is often skipped. Right? I mean, does anyone get really excited about writing performance reviews? No, we all dread doing it. It takes a lot of time and kind of emotional effort. So it can be really tempting to postpone and postpone and postpone. But if you actually just block it out on your calendar that you're going to take the time to work on it, you may not take the full time that you blocked out, but you're more likely to do it. The other thing, I did this training for a group last week, and I had a gentleman who was of a different generation above me that was basically like, I never prepare for it. I want to do it live and in the moment with the other person. And I was like, that sounds a lot easier for you and super stressful for that other person, right? It also, to me, doesn't show a lot of respect for the employee. Right? You've been working hard for me all year. I want to celebrate the things that you're doing that contribute to our bookstore's success. I want to highlight the areas that I want you to work on because I want to help the employee succeed in the interest of the business being successful. So giving yourself time. What can often happen is we feel like this is additional work that we have to do on top of our other work. This is the work. Right? This needs to happen, and people can feel it when you've spent the time to actually prepare and be thoughtful about the review process. The other thing too is that when we do reviews well, it builds that trust and can reduce stigma of feedback over time. Right? I had a bad employment experience before I started working at Zingerman's 17 and a half years ago, and it took me a solid 15 years to stop dreading performance reviews. I'm not joking. I would just be like, are you keeping me this year? Right? I'm like, if they were going to fire me, I would have known long before a performance review, but that burned me in the past. So employees bring a lot of that kind of baggage to play as well. Okay. So effective performance reviews. You can see an example of one from our restaurant, which I know is different work, but I think it just helps show the structure of how they do this at our restaurant. On the next 2 pages, it's a resource for you. We're not going to talk about this explicitly. Because what I want to do is put you to work again talking about problems. So what we learned from a gentleman named,
That's okay. Because are we turning past the template?
Yes, we are.
Okay, could I just ask a question about that really quick?
You can. I may or may not be able to answer it.
You're fine, but this example performance, would this be, the example performance template, would this be a version of I would give a copy of this same thing to the employee for them to self-review, and then I would receive this back?
I don't think so.
Oh.
I don't think so.
Okay. The self-review there's no format for that?
Not necessarily. We use a Google form at ZingTrain, but it's essentially what did you like the best? What did you feel like you did well in the past year? What do you want to work on in the next year? And is there any professional development you'd like to attend? So it's a pretty different structure. Yeah, I can find out more about that server. Haven't been a server at the Roadhouse, so I don't actually know. But I don't think they fill it out on their own. All right, talking about problems. So has anyone heard of Peter Drucker, famous business book writer guy? So he did some research and he found out that only 5% of problems in any organization are unique, right, and deserve unique solutions. The problem is that we try to apply unique solutions to the other 95% of recurring problems, and we end up wasting a lot of time and spinning our wheels trying to apply unique solutions to these problems that crop up over and over. And what he found is that there were typically 3 different types of problems. There were training problems, there were systems problems, and management problems. So starting on page 9 is an exercise to give you a chance to practice thinking about these different types of problems and seeing what do you think the primary problem for each scenario is. I'm going to tell you right now the temptation is to put management for all of them, and it is not. Management plays a role, but when you think about the solution that would solve this problem, management is often not going to be the right solution. So again, getting into small groups, I'm only going to give you about 5 minutes to discuss this. I will say this was not changed to bookstores for this conference. This exercise has always been bookstores. So I just felt extra fitting that we would do it here today. Okay? So about 5 minutes to talk about this, and we're going to debrief, and I'll define each type of problem after. All right, let's start debriefing. So I'm going to share some definitions, and there's room to write on the next page, just so you know. Okay, so scenario number 1, what type of problem do you think that one is? Just shout it out really loud. Systems. Does anyone disagree with systems? Okay, great, you're right. It is a systems problem. So how we define a systems problem is when there is no effective, agreed upon, and documented process in place that, when followed, delivers consistent results, right? So the agreed upon is really important here too. The managers need to be in agreement that this is the system we're gonna use. It doesn't have to be the best, it doesn't have to be the fastest, but this is the system that if everyone follows it, we're going to get the results that we want. And there's can be some evolution in systems, right? That like someone who's been doing it for a long time can do it with a little bit more finesse, and they don't have to follow every exact step if they get the results that we're looking for. But when we're training a new person, we need to have that system that when every single person follows it, will deliver the results that we want. Question.
So when you said agreed upon, I have a problem because like it appears in my store that all of the employees need to be in agreement when it's sometimes a directive from management. You know, this is what you have to do. How much do you have to agree with what the employees are saying?
I mean, I would say that the system, this is not something that we all need to be agreement on, but the employees, I mean, it's a performance expectation that you use the system. If we know that the system works, now that's just not to say that we don't need to update the system if there is disagreement on whether or not it works, right? So systems are not perfect forever. They need to evolve and be updated. But you know, if the manager, if the owner says this is the system, then it's the expectation is that people are going to follow the system. So scenario number 2, what type of problem? Say it loud and proud. Training. Okay, did anyone disagree with training? Okay, you guys are very advanced. It is a training problem. So this is the systems in place, right? It is effective, it's agreed upon, it's documented, but no one knows what the system is or how to use it. They haven't been taught how to use the system. So this is where sometimes people want to write the most beautiful, perfect SOP or system in the world, but then they put it in a binder and they put it on the shelf and they expect people to like intuit that it's there. That does not work. Or like just because you send an email or send a message in Basecamp or whatever, like Slack, does not mean that everyone has read it and understands it. You need to actually train people how to use the systems. Some people can just read it and understand it. Other people need hands-on practice, right? Or they need to hear it. They need to see it in action. They need to hear you talk through the description. This is really frustrating for the people who create the systems, right? When they feel like people aren't being trained on them. So then scenario number 3.
Management.
Okay, oh, management. Okay, all right, we're a little bit all over the place here. No, it's management. Yeah, because the system exists, right? The system exists. We have trained people how to meet the expectation, but they are not doing it, and no one is being held accountable. Right? So when I talked about the temptation is to assume all of them are management, because managers play a role in creating systems and agreeing upon them. They play a role in training and making sure that people are trained. But applying the solution of management, right, holding people accountable, will not solve a systems problem, and it will not solve a training problem. It is very tempting a lot of the time to apply whatever our lens is to this, right? So if someone's a trainer, everything's a training problem. Right? If someone's a systems-oriented person, then most problems are systems problems. Or like, not a systems problem because I wrote the most beautiful, perfect system, so it's got to be a training or management problem, right? What is really helpful about this is you can use it as a lens to look at what's going on, because you need to go in this hierarchy, right? The system needs to exist first, then we need to train people to the system, then we can hold them accountable. That can be like, often when you look at this and you're like, okay, now I actually know where to start. This isn't truly a management problem. So we did a series of trainings with a restaurant group, a Jewish deli in San Francisco. And we taught this to the managers. And then a month later, we got back together and asked them, like, how was it going? Were you using, the homework was to use this tool as a lens? And they were like, it was some real eye-opening things for them, right? Of like, they thought that it just needed to be a management problem. They needed to hold people accountable, but we're identifying systems problems and training problems that they weren't even aware that they were contributing to, right? So I think this is a really good place to start when we start thinking about performance problems. The other lens that I want to share is this belief action cycle, because I think this is really helpful for us to have in mind when we start thinking about solving performance problems. So we all have beliefs, right? They come from a lot of different places, including our backgrounds. They come from the media, past job experiences, right? Like my belief that when I had a performance review, I was going to get fired, right? That belief came into existence for a reason, right? So they come from a lot of different places. And beliefs can be positive, they can be negative, and they can be neutral, right? The thing is it can be really hard to identify what our beliefs are, and then to be able to see the impact that our beliefs are playing on our actions. So I want to talk this through with an example that I think happens a lot, right? Which is that I asked at the beginning, the show of hands, who likes giving feedback, was like 4 people, right? Who likes receiving feedback? Almost everyone else. So the belief can often be at the top, my belief is, they're not really going to listen to the feedback that I have to give, right? They don't really care. They're not going to take action on it. Why should I waste my time giving this person feedback if I don't believe that they're going to take action based on it, right? Has anyone ever had that belief about giving feedback? So then our actions from that belief are, I don't give performance feedback. I don't offer it. I don't offer coaching along the way or give gentle corrective feedback, right? In training or in other settings. I withhold it. I don't necessarily ask the other person, like, what questions of clarification do they have, right? I'm not as open with giving them other information or giving them a chance to ask questions. So if that is true, that employee's belief is going to not be super positive about me as the manager or us as an organization. Because even this is not where this started, they're going to believe I don't care. They're going to believe I'm not invested in their success. I don't want to help them. So their actions are going to be things like they don't ask for help when they should. Or they don't ask for help at the first sign of trouble. They wait until they've made a mess of something, right? Or they make a lot of assumptions or they give incorrect information. So these actions often tend to only reinforce our belief. It gets tighter and tighter and tighter in the center. I call it the death spiral, right? Where a negative belief leads to negative action, leads to negative belief, negative action. And then I'm in the like, see, I told you it wouldn't matter if I gave them feedback. They're not open to it. Where change can really happen here is if I can recognize that I have this belief and I can take, yep, there you go, different action. If I think, oh, this person doesn't care what I have to say, they're not going to listen to my feedback, I'm gonna take that back and say, okay, let's figure out what I can do differently. So maybe I'm gonna make myself more open to the person. Hey, you know what, let's have a sit-down meeting, like once a week for your first month. You can ask me any questions that you have. The other side benefit of that, Maggie, our founding partner, did that to me when I first got hired. I stopped interrupting her with every single question I had, because we had a dedicated time for me to ask her questions, right? It might have been once a week or once a day at the beginning, right? Then it trickled off to once a week. But she made it really abundantly clear that I was expected to ask questions, right? So the any questions is really different than what questions do you have, right? It implies that I should have questions, that she's there to help. Right? I'm going to share the benefit of my experience. Oh, I heard you talking to that customer. You did a really great job on that call. I have found this to be a really effective extra mile with that type of customer. Right? I'm acting with generosity rather than withholding information. That will ultimately shift that employee's belief. They believe that I am invested in their success. I want them to be successful. They might ask for more performance feedback than I was initially giving them. Now, this is not like a panacea, right? Just because I act positively and generously towards an employee does not guarantee that they are going to have positive beliefs or act the same way back, but it is more likely, right? Negative beliefs often beget negative actions. There's a quote from a former anarchist, or an anarchist, I don't know, Ari wrote about this, called Alexander Berkman, I love this, he's like, you cannot grow a rose from a cactus seed. It's really hard to expect positive outcomes if we're starting from a negative belief cycle, right? So when we're thinking about performance reviews, one of our organizational beliefs is that people show up to work to do a good job. No one shows up to work to be a jerk or get things wrong. If that's what's happening, something else is going on, and we need to figure that out. That people want generally, and this is past generations, right? I hear that a lot. It's like, well, kids these days, they don't want to work hard. I'm like, kids these days are still humans, and you can still give them clear performance expectations and expect them to meet those expectations. That is a universal human desire, right? People want to do a good job. So let's get into solving performance problems. There's a kind of a long ramp up to this, because I think that often we assume performance problems are happening, but that may not be what is really going on. So you'll see there's 3 steps here. We want to get to the root cause, determine a plan, and then choose a track. And I'll go into more detail on all of these. What I want to start, though, is saying this is always done with a belief that the employee can improve, right? We don't do, bless you, a performance improvement plan, right? We don't even start the performance, like if we don't think that this can actually work. So starting out with identifying what the root cause is. Right, we think that there are 5 different root causes. There's unclear expectations, lack of training, lack of motivation, the job is not doable, and or personal issues, okay? So I'm gonna talk through all of them. This is really about the manager getting clear and figuring out what's going on that is leading to these performance problems. It's almost always one of these 5. So the first one, unclear expectations. Right, so the root cause, the employee does not know what is expected of them, and therefore they can't meet performance expectations. This can come from a lot of different directions. One, like we just don't have clear documented performance expectations, so it's like they don't actually know what they're supposed to do. What I can tell you around customer service, I do a lot of customer service training. This is frustrating for both the manager and the employee, because the employee can tell that the manager is annoyed or frustrated with them, but they don't know why. And then like sometimes they'll try harder, but then they're doubling down on something that isn't actually what we want them to do. It could also just be a miscommunication, right? That we told them something that we thought was super clear and explicit, and they interpreted it differently. So what can we do to resolve this, to start solving this problem? One is to document and communicate clear expectations while giving the employee a chance to ask questions. Right? Again, what questions do you have? And they may not have the questions in the moment, but like once they start getting into it, I want to check in with them again. Ideally, I'm doing this verbally and in writing. So this morning at the session I attended, we talked about the importance of documenting what your processes, what your procedures, what you believe is. Because then you can start going over it with someone. And it is not fun. It is not always sexy, but it's really important. And reviewing it to make sure that it's accurate. The other thing that I think can happen here is that managers have a hard time owning this one because sometimes it's your fault. And I will tell you that a manager owning when they've made a mistake or when they weren't clear really matters to employees. It not only tells them, like, I want to know when I've made a mistake, I can own it, and then I want to do better in the future. It also allows them to make mistakes too. If you don't ever own as a leader or as an owner making mistakes, it's really hard to come to you when they've just screwed something up, right? So building that trust and being honest about when this is what's going on, I think is just it's an act of leadership to own up to when you've been a part of the problem. Okay. The next root cause, lack of training. So they don't have the ability, skill, or knowledge to actually meet the expectations. And what can happen here is like we showed them the SOP. Why did they not just internalize this 3-page document and are doing it correctly, right? People learn in different ways. So maybe this employee, we've given them verbal information, but they need to actually have it written down, right? Or maybe we've given it to them in writing, we've told them verbally, but they really need to see pictures of something in action in order to do it. Right, this is a little off center, but I made a pavlova, a big pavlova for the first time. Does everyone know what a pavlova is? Amazing, delicious dessert, meringue. They're prone to a lot of factors that cause it to not turn out well. One of which is that you need to get stiff peaks, but you can't go past that. There's no redeeming it if you go past stiff peaks. Right, so I'm making this. I've made meringue before. I've made pavlovas in a smaller format, but I'm making a big one, and it's for a friend's party. I'm just like, I got to get this right. So I go online, and there are tons of videos that want to show me this. And I was like, that is not going to help me in this moment. I need to see pictures at like different steps of the process. I need to see, what does soft peaks look like? What do hard peaks look like? What does it look like when I've gone too far? Right? I need to actually see that evidence, but watching it in a video or seeing like documentation in words was not going to get me where I needed to go with that. So how do we resolve this one? Well, we train them, right? And that sounds easy, but part of this is developing the tools and resources that will help you train anyone in this position. And it's not all on your shoulders. Long-term employees are really good at this. Right? Or a newer employee who's just recently learned how to do something, if you don't have documentation, asking them to help you with it, right? The sharing additional resources that are available, this is really true for us. We don't have to invent everything ourselves. So if there are resources that are available from the ABA, right, that exist from publishers, right, we use catalogs, our own catalogs, to train our own staff. Right? So using the resources like that are not strictly SOPs or training resources, just like cast the net a little bit wider can be really helpful in training your staff. And then the coaching and regular feedback. Again, if they feel like there's a lack of training, providing them more training and more opportunities to ask questions, I think is really productive. Root cause number 3, they are not motivated. I hate to tell you this, but no one can motivate anyone else. It has to come from within. So one of the solutions to this is to get to know your employee. What does motivate them? What drives them? Is it money? Is it a more flexible schedule? Is it getting home to take ARC copies of things? I mean, I worked at a bookstore. Those were gold. I still have a whole bunch. For some employees, autonomy is a great reward. Less oversight, right? That you don't need to be standing there with them while they're doing things because you know that they know what to do and you can trust them, right? Someone being able to be the closer, that can be, I mean, all of these different things, having a little bit more responsibility, surprisingly, can really like lock someone in, right? It provides the motivation for them. Asking them to train other people, because then they're a role model and other people are looking up to them. And then the last one is to buddy them up with someone because they have that support. And that person might be able to help them kind of like find the motivation. Then there's the job is not doable. It's not this employee, no one could do this job, or very few people could do it. And where this often happens is that we have a really seasoned person who's been doing this for a long time. Like they don't have to think about it, they're just really good at their job. Does anyone have those employees? Yeah, and then you try to set the standards by that person, and then no one could possibly measure up, right? So that happens. That's where sometimes the job not doable is that we're trying to set the standard to the person who is like the rock star at doing it. And we need to set the standard for like, what is a normal person able to do? Like what is 80% of what that rock star can do? What we also found, we were in the early days of Zingerman's Deli, we were losing employees because they were holding themselves to the standard of the owner. That was not an expectation for them, ever. But they didn't know that. So we being really clear of like, this is how fast we expect you to be able to do this. We don't expect you to be doing it at the same pace as someone who's worked here for 5 years. So being able to communicate those expectations, scaling down the job, adjusting those performance expectations to is what more reasonable. The other one there too is sometimes this causes us to need to look at our systems. Do our systems need to get updated? Are we asking this person to do too much? We also, what can happen here is job creep, right? You have the person who was hired for this one position, but then they started taking on these other responsibilities because they happen to be really good at that other thing. But then if they leave, we can't hire one person to do that job anymore. I'm seeing a lot of nods. We did this at ZingTrain too. Like when we had a marketing person who invented the position, she was our community builder. When Gowrie was gonna leave, we had to like reevaluate what this position actually was. It was not a sales position, but Gowrie was really good at sales. And so that had kind of just gotten added to her plate and she was able to do it. But that was not doable for like a non-Gowrie person to come into the role. The last one, and that you may identify strongly with this one, is personal issues. It feels like in the past 5 years, this has just flourished, right? People have more going on. They are experiencing more stress outside of work. And it impacts their performance, right? The whole idea of like, leave that stuff at the door does not exist. People are whole people, and so even if you're trying to push it down and do a good job at work, it's still stewing in the back of your mind, and people aren't always able to perform at their best. So some of the possible solutions here, what I want to just say is no one's expecting you to be your employee's therapist. That isn't an appropriate role for any of you, right? Even if you have a background in therapy, it's not reasonable to expect that of someone. So finding out what support can you offer to that employee? What are you able to do? Does anyone here have an EAP, an employee assistance program? Okay, you might want to research those, right? They do cost some money. We have one at Zingerman's. We use a company called Uliance. I am sure that there's a lot of other companies out there. I feel medium about them and the quality of their services. But if someone needs to talk to a therapist, right? They're okay. You have one.
The ABA has one.
Okay, great. The ABA has one. Okay. So like, if they need to write a will, if they need to talk to a lawyer, there's all of these different services that they can access through the EAP, right? So like, if someone needs mental health services, there is a certain number of sessions that they get for free a year. And we pay per use, not per employee. So just that is a resource that I think is really helpful. And even our own employees don't know about it. I'm on our benefits committee at Zingerman's, and we did a game for people and had them fill out a quiz. And it was like, which of these services can you access through the EAP? And it was like a list of 17 things. And the answer was all of them, right? But it was kind of funny to see people like just selecting a couple of different things. We have a newer employee who's like, oh my God, did you know that I could get like parenting tips on here? I was like, no, because I'm not a parent and I haven't explored that, but that is great, right? Like, thank you for actually looking into the resources that are provided here. The other thing too is that there might be other area resources that are available, right? So helping them connect with that, doing whatever reasonable accommodation that you can do. We definitely want to try as much as possible. We actually have a client who works in the vineyard management industry in Napa, and they just hired a person whose whole job is employee advocate. I mean, and not everyone is able to do that, but they felt really strongly about especially their non-English speaking migrant employees, helping them access resources that were available but they didn't know about. Right, so they had classes and things like, they helped connect people with classes like navigating the American school system, right? So not everyone can do that, but kind of thinking in that mindset, what are the resources that exist that you can help people connect with? So does this sound like the type of root causes you have experienced in the past? So what I want to give you a chance to do again is to talk to each other and try to find one root cause that you have in common. Or just choose one. I'm sure you've experienced most of them. And then identify what are things that you could do to support an employee who is experiencing that root problem. What are some of the things that you could do to help them as you go through the performance management system? Okay? So I'm going to give you about 7 minutes for this conversation, and then we'd like to hear from maybe 1 or 2 groups when we come back together. All right. The train whistle sure loses effectiveness the more you use it. All right, I would love to hear a little bit of reporting out. So if you are willing to share the root cause that you discussed and what are some of the potential supports that you could do for a team member, great.
Hi, I'm Rai She/Her from Kismet Books. Our trio here was talking about training specifically. We're all three from stores that have recently gone through an influx of, for example, tenured people who are doing maybe a not possible job to newer staff and readjusting expectations. And then we're just starting from scratch. So identifying things that can make that process smoother are just, reevaluating what is a reasonable expectation. And it sounds like doing a really good job of communicating with the owners, the higher up management, hey, I know this has worked before, but it's not reasonable now, and how difficult that can be to reset those expectations from the top, and maybe reframing that for the people on the floor, like, this may be what you've witnessed, but it's not okay to expect that from you right now, and it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to not be at that level, and you may never get to that level, so just reaffirming out loud, this is an expectation I have of you, that you will mess up, you will not be perfect, and that's okay. But our biggest one is just actually document it. It's not a process if it's never documented, because then it can change between people, it can change between days. So our biggest haul right now is just, is it actually documented? Otherwise, it's not real.
Yeah.
We did have a question, though.
Okay, great.
So I'm just going to name drop. We recently transitioned to book manager.
Okay.
What do you do when the training issue is not internal?
Oh. I mean, I think, so two ideas. One is to give feedback to the vendor, right? It's that this training didn't help us as much as we were hoping it would. Here's what we were looking for, right? Because I mean, the temptation is to be like, you didn't do a good job, but that doesn't help motivate someone to want to help you. So kind of just making it clear that like, this was my expectation. This is where my expectation was not met. Can you help me close that gap? The other thing that I would suggest is using your network of peers. Is someone using it effectively, and would they be able to help you with their best practices, or how did they train their staff if there was a gap between what was provided and what you need?
Okay, I guess we're definitely planning on doing that.
Great.
I'm meaning between like, okay, I'm the trainer. I've learned it a certain way. I've trained someone to do it. How do you, I don't want to say like walk it back, but how do you on the fly be like, I actually learned that we've been doing this wrong for 6 months. What's the best way to like reset?
I think exactly what you said. I just realized I've been doing this wrong, right? Or like, I realized that I misunderstood the system, right? I think that takes a lot of bravery, and employees really appreciate it. Or when you realize that the system is unclear or doesn't exist or people aren't following it, let's have a conversation about what we want the system to be. Like, this is what we're actually doing. We call that in our organization, we talk about the system, and then we talk about the culture, right? The culture is what's actually happening. And there's almost always a systems culture gap somewhere in every single organization, including ours. But when we talk about it, we own the systems culture gap, and then talk about what do we collectively need to do to bring that, to close that gap. Because sometimes it's update the system. Sometimes it's we actually need to follow the system, and we may need a little bit more training to bring us all into alignment. I also think that there can be times where you learn more, you can do better. So you can draw the line in the sand to say the way that we did it in the past was okay then, it's not okay now. This is what I'm going to expect you to do. When you have long-term employees, that can just be a really helpful thing, is we need a reset on how this is done. Like, we went to training, we learned this information, we're going to try this new thing. Also, posing it as an experiment makes it a little more palatable to people to try new things. All right, I saw a couple of other hands. I saw your hand right there, and then one other hand on the other side. Yep, the mic is coming to you. There you are.
So we were talking a little bit about management, employee relations, and in particular in my store, I have an employee whose sort of knee-jerk response to everything is a no, and they can sometimes be very challenging. And I was taking sort of those notes on providing more of a directive instead of an ask. But this person is really sort of hardcore in the knee-jerk no response, to the point that about 2 months ago, I kind of almost found myself in a... Mm-hmm. And so any suggestions on how to deal... I mean, I did look at your... I guess it was personal issues, and trying to think like, okay, what's really going on there? But I'm beginning to think maybe it's just a personality.
Yeah. So one thing that I think can be really helpful is we talk about giving people the space to react, then respond, right? Because if they're knee-jerk, I'm not asking you to answer this question right now. So you pose the question to them, and then you get back to them a little bit later for an answer, because that allows them to have the knee-jerk stress reaction, which is what it kind of seems like it is, and then give you a thoughtful response at a different point in time. So I think that, there are just some people that come from it's always a no first. I grew up with a dad who was it was disaster first. So everything that I used to be, I didn't want to be the Debbie Downer on the team that was always okay, but what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? Right? So I've had to learn to kind of shift my own thinking and patterns on that. So I wait for other people to say those things. And if they don't, I take a little bit of time to think about it, and then choose, is this going to be productive? Is this going to add to the conversation if I share that? But that takes a lot of self-awareness to be able to identify that that's what's going on, and then the willingness to shift the behavior. So that might be able to help. I did see another hand there. Oh, you have a comment on that. So great. You're going to answer that and then pass the microphone down the row.
I have the opposite situation where it's the automatic yes, which can be just as bad. So the space is really important. Being very upfront and frank, hey, I'm just going to tell you something and I don't want you to answer right now. I don't want you to respond right now. I have some feedback. I don't want to hear from you right now. I'll circle back with you tomorrow. Don't talk to me after I say this. I've had to tell my employees explicitly, when you ask me something, I will say yes immediately. That might not be reasonable. Give me the question, I will think about it and come back. Because the automatic yes is sometimes just as bad as the automatic no. But they also just might not be a nice person.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. All right, let's pass the mic down the row. Great, thank you.
Hi. So we were talking about, we come from a bookstore that has a very small staff, and as a result of that, there are not really clear job descriptions or defined roles. And as a result of that, the expectations can be pretty unclear sometimes.
Yeah.
And so something like a problem that we come across a lot is that, you know, somebody will come to somebody else and be like, hey, what is happening with this process? Why didn't this get done? And the person they came to is like, I don't know. Like, I don't know anything about that process. And was I supposed to, you know? And so I think that that's something that we are struggling with, is how can we, and especially because the way that it works is that we all kind of have the same job description, but like we'll take on certain things based on like what works well for our personality. And so like, how can we clearly define, this is the expectation for you specifically, or this is the expectation for this role, or this is who should be getting this done?
I feel like you can probably guess one of the first things I'm going to say, which is to document it, right? I mean, because the other thing too is to take your personalities out of it, right? It is the like, if we were to hire these positions, these are the positions this bookstore needs. And then let's get really clear on what those are. Another thing is we have a lot of overlapping responsibilities as well. And so we talk about who's first on something, right? So like, who's the person you go to first with this? And then others may do the same thing or help out with that. But that is like the point person for it. They're not the only person, right? So one of our things is first on phones. So like, if the phone rings, it's this person. If we hear the phone like ringing a second or third time, any one of us is going to pick up the phone and answer it, because we're all responsible for answering the phone, right? So I think that can be really helpful of it, just kind of like determining the hierarchy of responsibilities. Not that we don't all do the same things. Does anyone have the other duties as assigned in their job descriptions? Get rid of it. You need to get explicit about what that means. We put it in for good reasons. We used to have that too, but it just allows so much latitude, and that's where the job creep starts coming in. So, you know, and to know that they're not going to be perfect and they're not going to exist, but thinking about future employees, personality aside, can be helpful when you're doing the documentation work, because otherwise we get really attached to the things that we want to protect, that we want to be in charge of. Okay, one last comment, and then we're gonna talk about the next steps here.
It is actually a question. So what happens? You just said like to remove the other duties as assigned. So do you write new job descriptions every time you add a new? Oh, how would that work?
So it's just getting rid of that one thing. So I believe it's good practice when you post a job description or job posting, review it. Is this still accurate? If not, update it, right? So, I mean, sometimes we're not hiring very much, or we're in a hiring frenzy, right, for the holiday season. But I think like continuing to review it and update it keeps job descriptions accurate and job postings. Right. The other thing too that I didn't talk about explicitly here, I'm going to talk about a little bit more tomorrow, is think about the through line with hiring. What do our job postings say? What are the job descriptions? What are the performance expectations? How do we train people to meet the performance expectations? Then how do we hold them accountable? Those all need to be thought of at the same time, or thought of as a continuum. We were working with a restaurant group in Alaska. I really adore them, but someone came to a training when we were working with them in 2022. And we had talked previously about training. This time we were talking in the morning about interviewing and hiring, in the afternoon about performance management. And it was the first time she realized that those three things should be associated with each other. In their restaurant, they had one person who did the hiring, someone else did the training, and someone else did the performance management. And they were not apparently talking to each other. She's like, this is so frustrating. I was like, can you imagine how frustrated your employees are that they get hired for a position and then trained for something else, right? That doesn't feel very good. So connecting all of that in a through line. I want to answer your question, but I want to keep going, and I can stay late and answer everyone's questions. So solving performance problems. What we're talking about here, this is the determining a plan, step 2 at the top of page 12. We want to ask ourselves these questions. Can acceptable performance be achieved? Can it be sustained on an ongoing basis? If the answer to either of those questions is no, we're going to have a conversation about not working together any longer. Right? We want to give the person the benefit of the doubt. We want to assume that they can change their behavior. But if the manager does not think that performance can be sustained or achieved, let's not keep beating our head against that wall. That's frustrating for us, and it's frustrating for the employee as well. Now, if you don't think so, but the employee does, they're advocating for themselves, we will set a time period and give it a try. Right? We'll say, okay, let's keep this going for another month. If at the end of that month I have not seen significant improvement, right, and be really explicit about what success looks like in order for them to keep their job. Right? We want to give people multiple chances. People are not one instance. And we can be guilty of just keeping someone because we like them and they're nice, and that is not doing us or them any favors. Right? This often happens too when that person finally gets fired or leaves. Everyone else breathes a sigh of relief because they've been covering for that person. And now when we get someone new in who can really do the job, it's actually going to be easier on everyone. Has anyone ever had that experience, been guilty of that? Yeah, it's like once a person's finally gone, you're like, oh, why didn't we do this sooner? Right? It's hard. It's still hard. If we can say yes to both questions, then we move on to the next step, which is to choose the track, right? Is it a disciplinary process or is it an employment improvement plan? So I'm going to walk through each of those. You'll see some information on the bottom of page 12. There's also information on page 13. It's kind of the same information in different formats, but I'm going to talk it through on page 12. So track 1, this is a disciplinary process. So this is pretty cut and dry, black and white, very objective kinds of issues, right? It's dress code. It's showing up to work on time. So when we see someone not meeting those expectations, we start with informal coaching, right? That's soon after we see it. And it's in the form of, they end up with a verbal warning. If I see this again, I'm going to write it up, right? Whatever your write-up system is. Then, if it happens again, I'm going to write it up and I'm going to ask them to sign it. You know, I asked you to do this. You haven't done it. You showed up late again for work today. I'm going to write you up and I'm going to ask you to sign it, right? This is not a mystery. Again, no surprises. If it happens they get a final warning. So typically this is 2 to 3 warnings. If they do it one more time, we're going to do termination or reassignment. I will say this is most commonly a parting of the ways, because for it to be a reassignment, it's relatively rare. You need to believe that they're going to be successful in this other position. Because if we're just reassigning them because we hope that they're going to like all of a sudden get a personality transplant and be able to do this other job, like that's not fair to them, and it's not fair to the people that they're going to be working with. That being said, sometimes people can shift into a role that they are surprisingly great at. Right? This is someone who we hired to be on the front lines as a customer service provider. They are not excelling there, but now we move them into something else where they only manage events, or they manage school events, or they're working in kind of like a warehouse or a behind the scenes position, and all of a sudden they flourish, right? So it's not never, it's just not as common. The other thing is again, with the no surprises when we part ways. My friend Tabitha is the managing partner of our event venue. And Tabitha is the best person I've ever seen at firing people. ever. She's so good at it. They know it's coming. She knows it's coming. They've had multiple chances to change their behavior. And when the inevitable parting of the ways happens, it's kind of like, okay, well, I made choices that led up to this. I've been out to dinner with her in Ann Arbor, and then a young man came up and gave her a big hug and was so happy to see her. And I didn't know this kid, and I was like, who was that? She's like, oh, it's Joey. I fired him 6 months ago. I was like, girl, you are impressive. That is amazing, right? We don't all have those skills, but she's doing it from a kind place. It's like, I want you to be successful. And if we inevitably get to this parting of ways, it's not because I don't like you as a person. It's because you're not meeting the expectations and you had a lot of chances to change that, right? So if we get to the eventual termination, they've had at least 2 or 3 written warnings. The writing is on the wall here, okay? The other type of track is track 2. This is harder. This is when we put someone on a performance improvement plan. These are more complex. This tends to be longer-term employees, people who are on salary. It could be someone who has strong performance, but they're not values aligned, right? I think the terminology I read in a Harvard Business Review article was about essentially the effective jerk, right? They're really good at their job, but people don't like working with them. Or there's someone who's like super nice and tries really hard, but the customers keep complaining about this person, right? These are hard ones. But again, we've already made the decision that we think that performance can be achieved and sustained. So we start out here with informal coaching. We might need several conversations to really figure out what's going on. Then we're going to write them a documented performance improvement plan, which we call a PIP. It sounds so much more friendly than it actually is. So we're going to start by defining, here's what's going on. Here's where you're not meeting the expectations. Like, here's what the expectations are. Here's how you're not meeting them. Then we say, what has happened to date? Because we've already had a couple of conversations leading up to this written plan, I will have been giving them coaching. They will have been trying some things, and I want to acknowledge effort that's already happened, right? I can see that you're trying to do this. It will motivate them to keep moving through the PIP. I'll just say that. Then I want to set timeframes with measurable goals, right? It depends on kind of what the issue is, but 30, 60, 90 is pretty common for us. And I want to share consequences for non-compliance. Man, is that not a super fun term for everybody? Consequences for non-compliance. This is basically making it clear your job is on the line. Sometimes people don't really fully understand it until we're actually at this point. Like, for real, I need you to change what you're doing. Then we're going to set up weekly or biweekly, and by that I don't mean every other week, I mean twice a week, check-ins to talk about their progress. I mean, depending on the person, it could be every 2 weeks, but I want that person to know, these check-ins are going to happen, and we're going to talk about this at multiple points in the process. I'm not checking in with you at 30 days. I need to see that good faith effort is being made along the way, because this may not get to 90 days, even if that was the original goal. If they're not making progress by 30 days, let's not waste the rest of both of our time, right? This isn't a fun thing for either party. So then when we have this mid-plan check-in, it involves formal written feedback, acknowledging what they've done to improve, acknowledging what is left to go, that they also sign. Then at the end, again, written feedback is given on one of 3 kind of outcomes. Number 1, the PIP worked. They have changed their behavior. They've been keeping it up. We're pleased with the outcome. The second one, there's been enough improvement that the person stays employed, but maybe there's one area we're going to dial into that you have now a 30-day improvement plan on specifically that thing. And then the last one, there has not been enough progress. Again, no surprises, we're parting ways. So more documentation on page 13 is pretty much what I told you. This is from our internal material. It talks about D for P is our department for people. It's the equivalent of our HR. We changed the name from a document of occurrence to a performance UTO, and I hate it so much. Like, we're adults working with other adults. Can we come up with a different name? I actually think I'm going to advocate for a change in that when I go back. I was like, ugh, stop, no. On the top of page 14, you'll see this performance feedback template. I'm not going to go into detail here. This can be a template that you use to have these performance management conversations. Often it can be helpful to write it out, right? You don't want to go into the conversation with a script that you're then reading to the other person, because A, that's not a conversation, right? That's a monologue. And but it can be really helpful to get clear in your mind exactly what you want to say. At the bottom of the page is a reflection. So I'm going to give you a chance to reflect for yourself. What did you find the most interesting or surprising from this workshop? And what is something you're personally planning to do as a result of today's training? So please take a moment to answer those 2 questions. And then I would like to hear from at least 3 people before we wrap at the dawn of 3, at exactly 3. If anyone is willing to share one of their answers to either question, okay, I see a hand right there. Try not to point at people, just.
I have a lot to do. One of the things that I will do is go back and, for things that I think maybe aren't documented well enough, gather all those little slips of paper and scratches that my employees have written their own personal, like this to help me remember, and make a folder to help us remember, so that then I can go back to and make a document from those.
Great. Okay.
I found the reflection on attitude versus behavior really illuminating, and like naming something that I've been trying to name, especially for some of our managers who are just like, I'm getting a bad vibe from this person. I think they just might be bad. I'm like, that's not a performance thing. We can't coach them or discipline them on bad vibes. So what I'm going to do is sit down with my managers and talk through this and talk about let's identify some specific behaviors that we can give feedback on and hold folks accountable for those, make expectations clear and hold folks accountable for behaviors and not vibes.
Yeah. Woof. Yeah, vibes. All right, a couple in the front row here.
The liked best next time formula. I have an employee where with feedback, it seems that all the good feedback is negated by any constructive feedback. So I'm really interested in trying this kind of formula in that scenario and see if that helps the good be illuminated just as much as the things that need to be improved. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I will say that 4 to 1 is a good ratio of positive to constructive, right? If you think about putting coins into a piggy bank, when you need to make the withdrawal, you want more currency left in the piggy bank. Just so you know, a loving relationship is 7 to 1, and it gets inauthentic at 10. So just, I've had coworkers go back and practice that with their spouses and was like, I'm not even doing 4. I need to work on this. Okay, one last here in the front row, and then we'll wrap. And I'm going to stay around if you have questions. I'm happy to answer them.
I'm going to go back and review all the job descriptions because we definitely have had job scope creep on a lot of ways. And just go back and at least just be like, okay, events. You're doing also all the other 12 things, but maybe you should just be doing this one thing. And so on.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Hopefully this was helpful. Please do fill out the evaluation in the app. We want to keep getting invited back. And I'm going to stick around. My email address is up there as well. You're welcome to reach out with questions. We've got tons of resources at ZingTrain.com that are all free. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA website at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!